They found her collapsed beside the dry riverbed, curled in the shadow of a thorn bush, holding a dirt-caked blanket so tightly to her chest that her knuckles had turned white through the mud. The other Apache scouts hesitated, but Tahu Red Flame dismounted without a word, his eyes narrowing as he approached the half-conscious woman. She was white, no older than 20, barefoot and bruised, her dress torn at the shoulder, and her lips chapped from wind and thirst. But what stopped him cold was the desperate whisper that left her cracked mouth as he knelt beside her. "Please, don't take it off. You don't know what's under this." Her voice was barely air, yet it pierced him deeper than a spear. He crouched lower, reaching not for the blanket but for her wrist, checking for a pulse. It was weak, thready. She tried to scoot away, but her body failed her, and the motion sent her into a coughing fit. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, switching to halting English. "But you need help. You'll die out here." Her arms tightened around the cloth again, and she shook her head, fresh tears mixing with the blood on her cheek. He didn't push. He waited. The others called from the ridge, saying to leave her, just another white settler girl who wandered too far. But something in her eyes, the terror and shame tangled together, made Tahu ignore them. He removed his cloak, draped it over her back, and gently tried to coax her up. She resisted, then passed out against his chest. That's when it happened. The blanket slipped. Just enough. A sliver of skin showed between her shoulder blades, and what was carved there wasn't just scar tissue. It was a burned symbol, jagged, seared, decades old, an Apache sigil, but not just any. The mark of the Milkashi clan, a line believed extinct after the massacre at Burning Rock 30 winters ago. Tahu's knees buckled in the sand. He didn't even know he was falling until he landed, still holding her. His mind raced. That girl, that lost child, the one said to have vanished into the flames with her mother. Could she have survived? Had she been branded by her captors? Hidden in shame all these years? The mark had been desecrated, twisted at the edges by whatever iron had burned her. But it was still there. A relic of his people. He pulled the blanket back over her gently, as if sealing something sacred. From above, hooves thundered. Someone was coming, fast. He looked up toward the canyon ridge and saw dust rising. Settlers, maybe. Or worse. With no time left, Tahu lifted the girl into his arms and ran into the narrow pass that led toward the Elders' Caves, where no white men dared to go. Every footstep echoed against stone. The blanket warmed against his chest. And though she didn't speak again, her fingers clutched a broken necklace that he hadn't noticed before. One made from a tooth of sacred bone, worn only by daughters of fire bloodline. Tahu gritted his teeth. Whoever had dared to call her shameful had no idea what she carried. Whatever was under that cloth wasn't shame. It was memory. And now it was his to protect. The caves of the Red Wind Gorge hadn't housed a soul in years. But when Tahu laid her gently upon the sandstone ledge inside the largest chamber, it felt like something ancient stirred. The girl hadn't woken fully, but her grip on the blanket remained unbroken, even in sleep. Her other hand, though limp, still held the cracked necklace with the sacred bone tooth threaded through old sinew. Tahu crouched beside her as the fire he built flickered to life, casting amber light over her bruised features. She was pale, her breath shallow, her eyes fluttering now and then as if trapped in some fevered memory. He hadn't dared to look beneath the blanket again, not because he feared what he'd see, but because the reverence it demanded was too great for firelight and haste. What haunted him wasn't the scar itself. It was the question of who had done it, and why. The Milkashi were a proud and fierce lineage, and their blood carried stories like storms. He remembered, as a boy, the elder warriors telling of a child born under the eclipse, marked by flame and destined to unite broken tribes. A child who disappeared the night the Comancheros set fire to Burning Rock. "If she's the one," he muttered under his breath, but stopped. He was not a man given to prophecy or dreams, but now he was holding both. She stirred suddenly and gasped, clutching the necklace closer. Where am I?" Her voice cracked like dry twigs, raw and panicked. Tahu held up both hands in peace. "Safe," he said. "You're safe. No one followed us. You're with the Apache now." She blinked, still unsure if this was safety or another trap. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked, voice shaking. "The mark." He nodded slowly, solemnly. "I saw enough." "Then you know," she whispered. "What I carry can't be seen. It screams every night. They told me I was born cursed, that if anyone saw it, they'd kill me." Tahu leaned forward, the firelight catching the faint scar across his cheek. A wound he'd once taken defending a stranger's life. "They lied," he said. "That mark wasn't put there by your people. It was twisted by those who tried to erase who you are." She studied his face now, her expression softening. "You don't think I'm cursed?" "No," he said. "But I think whoever tried to bury you in shame knew exactly what they were hiding, from the world and from you." Her fingers loosened slightly on the necklace, and for the first time, the bone tooth slid forward into the light. Tahu's breath caught. The tooth wasn't just sacred. It was carved. A firebird, wings flared, head lifted toward the sky. Only one warrior ever carved that symbol. His mother. And she had only given it to her daughter. "What's your name?" he asked, barely able to keep his voice steady. She looked down, then whispered, "They called me Mara. But I don't think that was ever mine." Tahu's eyes burned. He didn't say it, not yet, but deep inside he already knew her true name. Kalinya. The lost flame? And if he was right, everything was about to change. By morning, the girl called Mara sat cross-legged near the fire, no longer trembling but not yet whole. The blanket remained clutched to her chest, her fingers tense with the instinct of years spent hiding. Tahu crouched nearby, watching her, not with suspicion, but with the quiet reverence of a man beginning to believe in stories he was raised to doubt. Outside the cave mouth, the canyon winds howled, but inside there was only the crackle of wood and the quiet between them. She had eaten a little, drunk water slowly, but spoken few words since sunrise. Still, something had changed. She studied her surroundings now, not like a cornered rabbit, but like someone trying to remember something long forgotten. Tahu handed her a strip of dried meat, but she didn't reach for it. Instead, she held out the necklace with the carved tooth and asked, "Who made this?" He took it gently in both hands, examining the tiny firebird etched into the bone. "It was carved by a woman of the Fireblood line," he said, "a line that was thought extinguished. My mother carved one just like this for her daughter. That girl died in a fire, or so we believed." Her eyes locked with his. "But what if she didn't?" Tahu didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the pouch tied at his hip and pulled out a small, folded piece of deer hide. Inside it, an identical tooth glinted in the firelight. Same bone, same carving, same curve of wing. Mara gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth. "You're her son," she whispered. "That means—" She couldn't say it. The truth curled in the air like smoke. Tahu nodded slowly. "If your mark is real, and this necklace came from my mother's hand, then yes. You are Kalinya, my sister." She looked away, tears building fast. They burned my back when I was 5, told me it would kill the witch inside me. They made me believe the pain was proof I was evil. I've spent my life trying not to feel anything." Tahu's voice cracked, but he steadied it. "They lied to you. They feared you, and they wanted to erase the bloodline that could rise again." "Then why do I still feel like I'm covered in ash?" she whispered. "Because they never let you burn on your own terms," he replied. "But that ends now." Mara wiped her eyes, then looked at him differently, not with fear or confusion, but with something like longing. Not romantic, not even familial yet. Just the aching desire to be seen as real. "Say my name," she said. "Please." He knelt beside her, hands on her shoulders, and said it with reverence. "Kalinya." The name seemed to echo against the cave walls, warm and sharp like flint striking stone. Something inside her flinched, then uncoiled. She inhaled sharply, and for the first time in a decade, she let go of the blanket. Kalinya's back faced the fire as she slowly lowered the blanket, the flickering light casting long shadows against the cave walls. Tahu remained still behind her, not out of discomfort, but reverence. When the blanket finally slid down, the scar came into full view, jagged, deep, seared into her skin by fire and iron. But it wasn't chaos. It was shaped, deliberate. Someone had carved something into her when she was too young to remember, and now the skin held a twisted brand that told a lie. Across the upper curve of her shoulders, the word was cruelly etched. Cursed. Tahu's breath caught, but just beneath it, faint but clear now that the skin had healed over time, was a second mark. A hidden one, formed not by fire, but by the shape of the burn around it, the firebird. It had always been there, buried inside the wound like a whisper no one bothered to hear. Tahu reached forward, not to touch, but to shield the cold air around her with his hand. "They tried to burn it out," he said, his voice breaking, "but they made it clearer. You don't carry a curse, you carry a prophecy." Kalinya didn't speak. Her eyes were shut, her jaw tight, as if bracing for shame. But it didn't come. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar. Warmth, not just the fire's heat, but the warmth of being seen fully. "I remember now," she said quietly. "There was a man. I think he was a priest. He said only holy pain could remove evil. My mother screamed when they took me. Then I never saw her again." Tahu's fists clenched. "They stole you," he said. "They stole you and made you think you were broken." "Why would anyone do that?" she asked. "Because if the daughter of the Fireblood line lived," he said, "the tribes might rise again, and the ones in power couldn't allow that." She turned to face him now, wrapping the blanket around her waist. "But I'm no leader. I don't even know who I am." Tahu's eyes didn't waver. "You're Kalinya, and you're still breathing. That's enough to start." She reached up and gently touched the scar. "Do you think it can ever go away?" "No," he said. "But maybe that's not the point. Maybe it's not meant to vanish. Maybe it's meant to speak." "Speak what?" "That you lived," he said, "and that you were never what they called you." The fire crackled louder now, casting an orange glow that made the scar seem almost like painted ink. Kalinya looked down at her hands, one still holding the necklace, the other resting on her chest. "What happens now?" she asked. Tahu stood and extended a hand. "Now," he said, "we ride to find the ones who did this. Not for vengeance, for answers." She hesitated, then took his hand, rising slowly. For the first time in years, she stood tall, shoulders square, chin lifted, no longer trying to hide. The word carved across her back had once defined her. But now, with the firebird burning just beneath it, it had become something else entirely. A false name over a buried truth. And that truth was walking toward the dawn. They left the canyon at first light, riding a weathered Appaloosa mare Tahu had trained himself. The world stretched wide and golden before them, with the mountains behind and the low ridges ahead that once marked the borders of sacred Apache lands. Kalinya rode behind him, arms wrapped loosely around his waist, the wind tugging at her loose hair like it wanted to carry it back to forgotten places. She didn't speak, but her silence was not hollow anymore. It was full, curious, remembering. By noon, they reached the remains of an old mission, half-crumbling walls, sun-bleached wood, a rusted bell with no rope. Tahu had chosen the place deliberately. "This is where they burned a circle of children," he said flatly, "all suspected of carrying what they called fire blood." Kalinya swallowed. "You said your mother carved both necklaces. Was she—" "She was spared," he said. "Barely. But they took her daughter. And every night after she carved that firebird again and again until her hands bled. To remember. To believe maybe she'd see her again." Kalinya closed her eyes. "That was for me." "It always was." The silence stretched, then footsteps approached. Not loud. Careful. Tahu tensed immediately. From behind the broken altar stepped a man in a dusty brown coat, long silver hair braided back, and a crooked smile that never reached his eyes. Kalinya froze. Her grip on Tahu tightened. "I know him," she whispered. "He was there." The man removed his hat and nodded. "Tahu," he said politely. "And I believe that's little Kalinya." Tahu stepped forward. "You're one of them, from the purging." "Was," the man said calmly. "I was young, zealous. We thought we were doing holy work, cleansing bloodlines that would destroy peace." Kalinya's voice cracked. "You tied me down. You held the iron." The man winced, just slightly. "You remember more than I expected?" "Why are you here?" Tahu asked. The man looked up toward the bell. "Because I knew if she lived, one day she'd come here. And because the others, the ones still in power, know too." "What do they want?" "To finish what they started." Tahu stepped between them. "She's under my protection." "That won't matter," the man said. "Not when the council finds out she's still alive. Not when they hear the firebird lives." Kalinya stepped forward now. "Then let them come. Let them see the scar didn't erase me." The man shook his head. "You don't understand. They've rewritten the story. Made your name a curse, not a legacy. If you stand up now, they'll paint you as the threat." "Then we'll be the threat," she said. "But we'll tell the truth." The man studied her. Then, strangely, he nodded. "I can't undo what I did," he said, "but I can tell you where they meet. And I can give you this." He reached into his coat and produced a folded map and a ring with the symbol of a sun half obscured by smoke. Tahu took it, inspecting both. "Why help us now?" "Because I branded a child once," the man said, looking at Kalinya, "and it still keeps me awake." He turned and walked into the dust, vanishing like a memory before she could ask his name. Kalinya held the map in her hands. Her voice was steady. "Let's go rewrite their version." The map smelled of age and ash, ink faded but legible, lines hand-drawn, with Apache symbols barely visible beneath the Western script someone had scratched on top. Tahu and Kalinya knelt beside a quiet stream, the midday sun glinting off the ring like it was burning with judgment. The map showed a place deep in the Badlands, where the ancient council once gathered before the purging began. But there was something else, etched faintly in the corner in a language only someone raised Apache could understand. Where the firebird first sang, "The truth still echoes." Kalinya traced it with a trembling finger. "This symbol," she said. "My mother wore it on her belt. It's not a place. It's a name." "Mine." Tahu's eyes darkened. They didn't just erase your story. They stole it, hid it under lies, and used your scar to control you. Then let's take it back, she said. They rode for 2 days, cutting across the mesas, sleeping beneath hawk cries and cloudless skies. On the 3rd evening, the land changed. Sharper rocks, dried rivers, and red dust that stuck to their boots like blood. Tahu pulled them to a stop beneath a massive cliff shaped like a bird in flight. There, he said, pointing to a cave barely visible in the shadows. They climbed carefully, every step echoing like the land was watching. Inside, they found a shrine, abandoned but untouched, filled with carvings of birds, flames, and women holding bowls of light. In the center was a stone basin, and above it a faded mural. Kalinya stepped forward, staring at the figure painted in ochre and coal. A girl, arms raised, flames rising behind her, not being burned, but becoming the fire. "That's not a curse," she whispered. "That's a rite." Tahu stood beside her, voice hushed. "They turned it into a punishment. But this was initiation. It means your line wasn't just sacred. It was central to the old ways." Kalinya knelt by the basin and ran her fingers across its smooth edge. "They took my mother's name, my tribe's song, and carved a lie where my truth should have been." She dipped her fingers into the dust at the bottom and pressed them to her scar. "But I remember now." Tahu reached into his satchel and pulled out the second necklace, the one she had unknowingly carried all these years, and laid it before the basin. "This belongs here," he said. "But you belong out there, telling them they failed." She looked up at him, something fierce rising behind her eyes. "Do you think anyone will believe me?" "Some won't," he said, "but the ones who matter will. And the ones who don't will fear what they tried to bury." She rose slowly and turned to the mural again. The girl in flames didn't seem afraid. She seemed powerful, at peace. "Then I'll go where they burned me," she said, "and I'll rise from it." As they stepped back into the twilight, the wind picked up, swirling red dust around them like ash, and for a moment, the mural behind them seemed to shimmer, like the firebird itself had exhaled. They had the map. They had the truth. And now they had a name. The next move would be war, but not with weapons, with memory. They arrived at dusk, just as the wind shifted west and the scent of burning sage drifted through the valley. The gathering place, once called Whispering Hollow, was no longer hidden. 6 tents stood in a circle, their poles etched with old Apache prayers, while lanterns flickered between them like quiet stars. Tahu dismounted first, every step cautious, his hand never far from the blade at his hip. Kalinya followed, her braid tight, her scar uncovered for the first time. Her dress was simple, but the firebird symbol had been stitched across her chest with crimson thread, a message to anyone who dared to look. The silence was immediate. Every head turned. Old men, younger scouts, women holding children, their eyes locked on her like she'd stepped out of a story they'd been warned not to believe. "Is it her?" someone whispered. "She wears the mark." "But they said she died." One of the elders rose slowly, his voice a low rasp like dry leaves. "What do you call yourself, girl?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "Kalinya of the Firebird line, daughter of Sail, who was branded and silenced." A stir moved through the circle. The elder studied her, then motioned for her to approach the central stone. "There's only one way to know," he said. "Place your hand on the stone. Speak your blood aloud." Tahu stepped forward. That ritual hasn't been used since before the burning. It's dangerous. So is forgetting, the elder replied. Kalinya didn't hesitate. She placed her palm on the cold, cracked stone and spoke in a voice steadier than she expected. I am of the Red Ash Band. My mother carried fire in her heart. They called her cursed, but she called me her dawn. A moment passed. Then the stone began to glow, faint but pulsing. The light shimmered around her fingers like memory coming alive. Gasps followed. One woman dropped to her knees. An old scout covered his face. The elder's voice cracked. It's true, the fire lives. Kalinya turned slowly, voice sharp as obsidian. You all let them erase us. You watched while they branded children and buried the truth under shame. And now you stare at me like a ghost. The woman on her knees looked up, tears streaking down her face. Because we thought you were one. We buried what we couldn't bear to lose. Then unbury it, Kalinya said. With me. She removed the map from her satchel and spread it on the stone. They still gather. They still preach the lie. We go tomorrow, and when we speak, it won't be with rage. It will be with memory. The elder stepped forward, placing his hand beside hers. You will not go alone. One by one, others joined. Tahu watched silently, pride and fear tangled in his throat. He had carried her this far, but now the fire was hers to wield. As night fell, they built a circle of flame around the stone, each flame a vow to stand, to remember, to rise. And somewhere beyond the hills, those who had branded her began to stir. Sensing the fire they thought they had extinguished was walking toward them with a scar uncovered and a name reborn. By the time the sun rose, 40 riders followed her. Not all were Apache. Some were half-bloods, some outcasts from other tribes, and a few were townsfolk who'd seen too many lies written in too much blood. They moved like a whisper across the dry plains, not shouting war, but carrying a silence that weighed more than any battle cry. Tahu rode beside Kalinya, eyes scanning the horizon, heart caught between awe and dread. She wore no mask. The scar across her back was uncovered, dust clinging to it like the land refused to forget. The firebird symbol now painted down her spine in red clay matched the one stitched across her chest. And in her saddlebag, wrapped in black cloth, was the carved wooden board from the cave. Each line of it proof that her story was never meant to be erased. By noon, they saw the camp. Dozens of white tents spread across the hillside like sickness. A stage had been built in the center, a crude pulpit of polished wood, where a preacher stood rehearsing damnation. On the far side, women knelt in rows, heads bowed, backs exposed. Kalinya's fingers gripped the reins so tight her knuckles whitened. "That's where it happened," she whispered. "That's where they held me down." Tahu touched her arm, gently. "Then we take it back, without becoming what they are." She nodded once, and they dismounted. No weapons drawn, no shouting. Just 40 people walking toward a stage where lies were spoken as scripture. The preacher saw them coming and laughed. "The cursed girl returns," he bellowed. "You bring your demons to our gathering?" She stepped forward, alone, and untied the cloth. The carved wood gleamed under the sun. "You speak of demons," she said, voice ringing like a bell in smoke. "But you forget who carved them." She raised the board high. "This is the truth. My name is Kalinya. This scar on my back is not your shame. It is your fear made visible. You burned my name to silence it. But the land remembered." The preacher spat. "That's Apache witchcraft." She stepped closer. "Then ask your women," she said. "The ones you branded. Ask them if they feel cursed or just abandoned." One by one, the kneeling women looked up. Some were crying. One stood slowly. Then another. until all of them were on their feet, walking toward Kalinya, not as warriors, but as witnesses. "You don't get to speak for us anymore," one of them said. "We remember who we were before your sermons." The preacher fumbled backward. "This isn't how this ends." "No," Kalinya said softly, lifting the carved board toward the crowd. "But it's how the truth begins." Someone cheered. Then another. And the sound grew, not into war cries, but into something quieter, deeper, like the sound of breath returning after years underwater. The preacher dropped his book and ran. Tahu exhaled for the first time. Kalinya turned to him, tears streaking her dust-covered face. They stood. "You lit the fire," he said. "They just remembered the way." In that moment, a warm wind swept through the clearing, and the red clay on her back dried into something permanent. Not a scar, a seal. The firebird had landed. On her, in her, through her, and the valley would never forget it again. The preacher didn't run far. They found him crouched beneath the shade of a hollowed sycamore, sweat dripping down his face as if chased by ghosts. He wasn't alone. 2 other elders, men Kalinya recognized from the day she was held down and marked, stood with trembling hands and brittle eyes. One had wielded the branding iron. The other had carved the word into the wood she now carried. Tahu waited for her signal, but Kalinya walked alone. She didn't draw her knife. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood in front of them with the scar on her back bared, and the firebird clay still clinging to it like it belonged. "Tell me what you see," she said to the man who had once branded her. His eyes wouldn't lift. "I see what we made you into." "No," she replied calmly. "You tried to make me vanish, but I remained. So again, what do you see?" The man's voice cracked. "We called it a curse, but your face, your walk, your fire, it was never cursed. It was holy. We burned what we couldn't name." The one with the carving knife turned away, weeping into his hands. "We were told to keep the tribe clean," he said. "The women who bled in strange moons, the girls who saw dreams too clearly, we erased them because we thought silence meant survival." Kalinya looked to the preacher. "And you? What lie will you cling to now?" He swallowed hard. "I didn't know what they planned. I didn't hold you down." "But you sang while they did," she said, "and you told the crowd it was sacred. You let their silence become a sermon." "What do you want?" he croaked. "Vengeance?" She shook her head. "Number, I want memory. I want every daughter born under your teachings to know they were never dirty. I want their names sung, not silenced." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a bundle of charcoal sticks, the same kind they used to mark shame. "Take these," she said. "Write her name, Soel, across your skin, then write mine." The men looked horrified. "You want us to bear it?" "Yes," she said, "not as punishment, but as witness. If you forget even once who we were, look in the mirror." Tahu stepped forward, handing them water and cloth. No chains, no blades, only truth. The branding man took the charcoal with shaking hands, and with tears streaming wrote Sael on his own chest. "She sang," he whispered, "even while we held her." "She still sings," Kalinya said, and touched his hand. Once, like closing a chapter. As they turned to leave, one of the younger women who had followed Kalinya from the gathering stepped up beside her. "What now?" "Now," Kalinya said, "we go home." "To the hollow?" the girl asked. "No," she answered, glancing toward the red cliffs on the horizon. "That place belonged to the past. We build new ground, where no one kneels for shame, and scars are not hidden." The girl smiled. "What will we call it?" Kalinya looked to Tahu. "Wherever the firebird lands," she said, That will be our name." Behind them, the three men knelt, not because they were commanded to, but because their knees could no longer carry the weight of silence. And in the dust at their feet, charcoal lines spelled out not just names, but beginnings. They named the land Kanashka, meaning the place of returning light in the old Apache tongue. It wasn't marked on any maps, and no trails led directly to it, but word traveled like sparks on prairie wind. Women came first. Those who had been cast out, labeled, bruised by sermons that saw them as burdens. Then came the young, curious, hungry for stories never told around their fathers' fires. And slowly even the broken-hearted men arrived, the ones who had held the branding irons or stood by and said nothing, now walking with eyes lowered and hands open. Kalinya never called herself a leader. She said only that she remembered. And so every dusk, under the hollow cedar tree near the cliffs, she would gather them around and tell the truth, not just of the day she was branded, but of the day she stood, and the day the Firebird landed. The carved board rested beside her, not as a relic, but as a reminder. She kept the scar uncovered. Not once did she flinch when children touched it gently and asked, "Did it hurt?" "Yes," she would say, "but not as much as forgetting does." Tahu stayed near her side, rebuilding the new homes by hand, one log, one stone, one breath at a time. He never claimed her, never owned her, only stood beside her, his silence no longer hollow but full. On the 10th day after they settled, a storm swept through. Thunder cracked, and lightning split an old cottonwood that stood alone on the ridge. When the storm passed, Kalinya climbed the hill barefoot. The tree burned from within. Not wild, not dangerous, just glowing softly like the inside of a drum. She touched its bark and whispered, "I see you." The next morning, children ran through the camp yelling that the Firebird had landed again, this time not in scar or symbol, but in a tree that refused to die, only to burn without breaking. The preacher came on the 15th day. He was gaunt, thinner, no longer dressed in black. He carried no book, only a pouch of salt and tobacco. He didn't ask to speak, just knelt by the edge of the circle and waited. When Kalinya finished the story that night, she walked to him and held out her hand. "Do you remember Sale?" she asked. He nodded. "She came to me once," he whispered. "In a dream, she didn't speak, she only sang." "Then let that be enough," Kalinya said, and poured the salt into the fire. The flames crackled once, then rose, blue and gold and sudden. Gasps rippled through the gathering. A wind circled and then stilled. And in the quiet that followed, the fire seemed to speak, not in words, but in memory, in forgiveness, in return. No one moved, no one dared to. Until one of the young girls, no older than 7, reached out and touched the flame. It didn't burn. She laughed. Kalinya's eyes filled. "That," she said softly, "is what they tried to take from us." "What?" Tahu asked. She looked at him. "The right to laugh again." As the moon rose, they danced, not for gods or ghosts or revenge, but for breath, for light, for each other. And across the land, wherever fire burned that night, it did not consume. It remembered. The firelight flickered against the walls of the medicine shelter as Nakomi sat motionless, watching the Apache's face. Kawasha's hands trembled where they hovered above her shoulders, not from fear, but reverence, like a priest before an altar he never knew he'd one day kneel at. "Tell me what you saw," she whispered, voice brittle as snow underfoot. Kawasha swallowed, but no words came. Not yet. What he'd seen beneath that hide wrap was not a scar or wound or shameful stain. It was the same sun-shaped symbol he wore burned into his chest, a mark his grandmother had placed on him as a child, passed down through warrior bloodlines, not meant for public eyes. But there it was, drawn on her skin, precise in form, and older than either of them could explain. "This isn't just your mark," he said at last, voice like stone splitting. "It's mine. It's from my mother's side. She called it the soul's seal." Nakomi's breath caught. "Mine too," she said, eyes blinking slow, stunned. "But I never knew what it meant. My mother was taken from the Comanche when I was born. She died before she could explain it. I thought it was a curse." The tent quieted, the outside winds retreating like even nature dared not interrupt this moment. Kawasha dropped to his knees again, this time with purpose, reverently placing both hands on the floor between them. "This is not a mark of shame," he whispered. "It's a summons. You and I, our blood was bound before we ever met. You were not made for them, Nakomi. You were carved for this fire." She trembled, not from cold, but from a warmth that hadn't visited her bones in years, a truth so bright it made her squint from the inside. She reached forward, touching the matching mark on his chest through his shirt. "Then why did I suffer so long?" Her voice was quiet agony. He nodded slowly, solemn. "Because sometimes the earth must crack for the spring to rise." Silence fell again, not empty, but sacred. He did not kiss her, did not touch her without invitation. Instead, he took the edges of her blanket and pulled it back up around her shoulders, as if shielding her from everything that had ever tried to undo her. "Tomorrow," he said gently, "I will speak to the elders. They must hear your truth." Her eyes widened. "They'll spit me out again." "They might," he said, standing. "But this time I'll be standing behind you." She let out a laugh, broken, short, but the first sound of life that wasn't sorrow. "And if they cast us both out?" she asked. He turned, meeting her gaze full. "Then we'll build something better where their walls can't reach." She stood too, taller now somehow, not because her height had changed, but because she no longer slouched to hide. The mark on her back no longer burned. It glowed. As they stepped out into the darkness, the stars blinked overhead like they'd been waiting centuries to see her walk freely beneath them. They gathered at dawn beneath the tree that had once held the branding board, now cut down and burned weeks ago, its ashes scattered in the roots of the healing garden Nakomi tended each morning with her bare hands. No elders had summoned this gathering. No law demanded it. And yet nearly every soul from the valley, Apache, settler, runaway, wounded, stood in silence as Nakomi stepped forward, her back bared to the rising sun, her shoulders proud, her eyes unflinching. The mark still lived across her skin, but now it was no longer read as shame. It was a message, a warning, a prayer, a truth that could no longer be buried. Kawasha stood just behind her, arms folded, face unreadable but presence solid as a mountain. No words were needed, not at first. The silence said everything. You failed her once, do not fail her again. The preacher who had once condemned her wept in the crowd, not from guilt alone but from awe, because he knew that no sermon he had ever given held this kind of fire. A child stepped forward, a girl with hair in uneven braids and mud on her face. "I have one too," she whispered, lifting her sleeve to reveal a birthmark shaped like a broken circle. Nakomi knelt before her and traced it with a single finger. "Then you are part of the story too," she said softly, "and no one will burn your name from the world while I still breathe." One by one, others came forward, some marked by scars, others by silence, all by stories too long buried. Nakomi didn't promise to save them. She simply listened. And in that listening, something began to heal, not quickly, not all at once, but like grass growing through ash. That night, they lit a fire, not for warmth or warning, but for remembering. Nakomi stood beside it, hair loose, the wind not tangling but dancing through it. Kawasha took her hand, not possessively, but with the gentle grip of someone holding sacred ground. "Do you still feel like something's under the skin?" he asked. She looked at him, then at the flame. "No," she said quietly. "Now I feel like something's finally come out." And then, with no music but the crackling of fire and breath, she danced. Not to perform, not to seduce, but to exist. The others followed, not in rhythm, but in spirit. Old men swayed, mothers laughed, children spun until they collapsed into laughter. And above them all, the sky turned the color of bruised violets and fresh gold, as if even the heavens wanted to weep and rejoice in the same breath. Kawasha pulled her close then, whispering something only she would ever hear. She didn't cry. She just breathed it in and exhaled years of silence. The scar on her back glowed faint in the firelight, but no one looked away, because in that mark they no longer saw ruin. They saw the first spark of something too powerful to ever brand again. And when morning came, the fire was still burning, small, steady, alive. Like her. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If someone carried a mark like hers, would you have looked away or looked deeper? Tell us in the comments.